8:45. Let's see what's in the papers this morning with the parliamentary sketch writer at The Telegraph, Madeline Grant, and showbiz reporter Stephanie Tecci. Good morning, ladies. This is a serious one in the Mail,
yes.
Madeline, to begin with. All these claims of anti-Semitism at the BBC.
Yes, I mean, the BBC has had a really torrid time in terms of the amount of criticism they've been getting ever since October the 7th. They've had to reprimand various employees, and more recently, actually, an investigation by the newspaper I work for, The Telegraph, found that a number of the BBC Arabic employees had made some terrible remarks around the time of October the 7th, and they were still working and they hadn't been sacked or anything like this. We're talking truly abhorrent things. And now they have put out, the Director General, Tim Davies, put out a statement saying that they have been alerted to even more anti-Semitic behaviour and saying there was no place at the BBC for this kind of behaviour. And, it's quite a frank acknowledgement that there is a serious problem there, that we haven't had such an acknowledgement from them so explicitly.
What is very odd is BBC sort of woke central in a lot of ways, which makes it very surprising. But then there's always this strange correlation somehow between the left in politics and anti-Semitism. And obviously Keir Starmer is desperately trying to shift, but that exists as well, which is very strange, I think.
Yes, it's a very odd sort of unholy alliance in this country between the very crank parts of the far left and the kind of Islamist variety of anti-Semitism. But it is pretty bonkers because you may see people, like very left-wing people out on marches, basically excusing an organisation like Hamas, which, as we know, would persecute gay people and many, all the causes they claim to support elsewhere, they seem to not really care about when it comes to Israel and Hamas.
I'm constantly surprised that, the three young women that had the paragliders on their clothing. It's like, young women, do you know what would happen to you if you were under Hamas's rule, by the way?
Unbelievable.
But it's good Tim Davie put in an email like this, but what action is actually going to be taken? Like, how do you deal with people who have these thoughts and beliefs and opinions when they're workers in your organisation? It's
whether they do anything about it.
Yeah, and it's like, how do you do that? I've worked at the BBC before, and I know that they're quite strict on what you put out on social media, so it's quite brave of these people to be making such anti-Semitic comments.
Stupid.
But I think most organisations now are going to have to really check themselves and their employees who do have these kind of thoughts.
Talking of social media and smartphones, Stephanie, this is a story you found in The Guardian.
So 4,000 parents and growing have joined this WhatsApp group, which was initially set up by just two friends, and they only had a couple of their friends on it. It's called the Smartphone-Free Childhood. And the reason they've set it up is because they're really campaigning, and they hope it turns out into a national campaign, for children not to have smartphones until they're at least 14 and not have social media access until they're 16 years old. The reason why they've set this WhatsApp group, they've just said, let children be children. They shouldn't be having this life of time of scrolling and also accessing content which is quite detrimental to their health. And I totally agree with it. I think, you should at least give children a chance not to be glued to smartphones and to let their imagination run free. So I think it's quite bold that these parents are doing it. But then also it means that these parents need to provide entertainment and stuff that will stimulate their children, because I know there's also other parents who give their children laptops, iPads as a way to distract them so they don't have to entertain them.
I tell you, Madeline, isn't this genie out of the bottle? The amount of times I've seen sort of like, adults completely ignoring children, and the children are on their phone, the adults are on their phone.
Oh, absolutely.
And you actually see a parent reading a book with a child, and it's like, oh, my God.
Oh, my God, yes, it's true. The other day I was on the train and I saw a dad and his two kids, and he was reading them a book. They were good as gold. They were quiet all the way to... And I was so impressed, because you don't see that
But the fact you're shocked by it.
I know. And I know what you mean about the genie being out of the bottle. And the difficulty is, children obviously look at their parents and copy what they do. Many parents are themselves addicted to their smartphones, or else they have the kind of job where you have to be constantly on call, constantly responsive to stuff. But maybe people should be... I mean, I think Stephanie makes a really good point that if there were greater awareness around this, if we talked about it more, parents might think twice before just mindlessly scrolling in front of their kids.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Yeah, you've got to you definitely, if you're going to stop it, you've got to ban it across the country.
Yeah.
Although then their kids don't feel like they're missing out. Whereas if they make a smartphone, then the whole thing falls apart. Yeah. Madeline, The Times is asking, does Sunak care? I think he does.
Yes.
About the election result.
Well, he's trying to act like, oh, it's no biggie. You know, we have these sorts of challenges, as Dawn was saying earlier, which is politicians never have problems anymore. It's always challenges. Or issues is another favourite. But this is interesting analysis from John Curtis, the pollster, and he's basically pointing out, obviously, you know, this has been a very, very disappointing 48 hours for the Tories, though perhaps not a surprising one. But the bigger point here is that the party hasn't really seen any big change in the polling since Rishi Sunak came in, which suggests that nothing much that he tries to do, none of his stated announcements or tax cuts or anything like this seems to be making a real dent into the polling. And it kind of reminds me of that famous comment that Jim Callaghan made when Margaret Thatcher came in, that sometimes there is a sea change in politics and that's just the way it's going to go. Yeah. And it's really, it comes a point where the incumbent party, what they do, doesn't really matter anymore. And it feels like that's where we are now.
It actually does feel like that, doesn't it?
Yeah.
At the moment. What do you make of Reform in all of this? How they performed?
Well, they did very well, and you know, the fact that they've leapfrogged the Lib Dems is interesting, because if they can set themselves up as the place that you go for a sort of protest or a disaffected vote, that's interesting. And although Tory strategists are keen to kind of point out that they don't own everyone that votes for Reform and that these are not necessarily left-wing people, sorry, right conservative people, it is interesting that the votes combined in Wellingborough, I think, or is it...
No, Kingswood.
Kingswood, sorry, yes, you're right. That collectively would have beaten the Labour Party, so that obviously this is going to dig into there. Yeah. And then it could be even worse if Nigel Farage decides to go for it, because that would make things even more dangerous for the Tories.
But do you think it's fair that Rishi takes the blame for the failings of the Conservatives? Because he's only been in power, over a year? Yeah. And we've had a Conservative government for over 13 years. So isn't this just a collective of failings of the Conservatives?
He was Chancellor, though, beforehand, wasn't he?
No, but that's a really, really good point, and I agree. And actually, if you look at the polling, where things really dipped never to return was Liz Truss, actually. It seems like they could never recover from that particular... I mean, the trouble is that Rishi Sunak was very keen to pick up that poison chalice. Many people would have said, this is... I might just wait around and bide my time and let someone else take the flak.
Politicians for you, they all want the top job.
They do.
Let's just very quickly, Stephanie, have a look at the Bee Gees movie in the Times.
Yes, I do like a biopic, and it seems like in Hollywood there's this big trend of bringing musician stories to life, and the Bee Gees now, we're set to see their story come on to the big screen, and it's set to be directed by Sir Ridley Scott. He's been working on it for a few years with Barry Gibb, who will be an executive producer on it. No cast have been announced at the moment, but I think it'll be quite an interesting story, because they did have quite high highs and lows during the 70s when it was all about discos. They were really at the height of their fame, but then, you know, when I was reading today, they said at the end of the 70s, when disco fell out of favour, it was like they almost were getting criticised everywhere and even facing bomb threats.
What?
And they were trying, yeah. So this is why I think it'll be an interesting story, and they have an amazing catalogue of music as well.
It's Saturday Night Fever. So good, Ever.
I was friends with Robin Gibb.
Really?
And to go around about a year ago, I went back to his house to see Dweena, his widow, and to go through their house and all the stuff and the records on the wall and all that is phenomenal. There's a great exhibition actually in Thames.
Amazing.
Tame, I should say. There's a permanent Robin Gibb Museum there now.
Lovely.
It's lovely. It's well worth seeing.
Tragic family story.
Oh, well, that's what I was just about to say.
Yeah. Anyway, we're out of time. Good to see you both this morning.
Thank you so much.
Very much indeed. Here's your weather.